Hello, everyone. This is James Song here. Welcome back to the TOEFL show. Today, I'm giving you a brand new, complete and full TOEFL listening test. So just like the real TOEFL listening section of the real TOEFL iBT test, this video has 5 passages, 2 conversation passages with 5 questions each, and 3 lecture passages with 6 questions each. So all up, 5 listening passages with 28 questions. So to do this part, you need pen and paper to write down notes. So please get yourself ready. And if you're ready, I'm going to start this listening test right now. Let's go, guys.
Listen to a conversation between a student and his academic advisor.
Hi, Mark. What can I do for you?
I'm just filling out this approval for graduation form for the dean's office, and I don't know. I hope I'll be able to graduate next semester.
Well, as long as you've met the departmental requirements and you submit the form on time, you shouldn't have any problem. Make sure you include all the classes you will have taken for your degree in finance and the electives too.
Yeah, but as I looked over the form, I got confused because of the way, they've changed the requirements. So now I'm not sure I'll qualify to graduate next semester. I know I would have before, under the old requirements.
Well, when the business department changed the curriculum to include more courses in international business because of the increasing globalization of business, we made sure that students who had finished their second year, that is, those who were in their third or fourth year, wouldn't be affected. The new rules only apply to students in their first or second year.
Oh, that's good to know. The department's hiring new faculty too, I heard, to teach some of the new courses. But I want to...
Yes, one new faculty member has been hired. She'll be teaching international banking, as a matter of fact.
Actually, that's what I wanted to ask about, international banking. I took International Banking 1, but I never took International Banking 2. It used to be that the second semester of international banking was an elective, but now it says it's a required class.
Yes, but that's one of the recent changes, so...
Okay. And I'm planning to take a management course next semester, but I don't know if it'll count toward my major.
What's the course?
Organizational behavior.
Yes, that'll count towards your major. That's a difficult class, but well worth it. So it looks like you'll have all the required classes you need. You should be just fine. I assume you've taken a seminar?
Yeah, I took the marketing seminar.
Okay, you're looking good. Just to be on the safe side, why don't you talk to someone in the dean's office before you give them the form?
Okay. So, should I just explain to them that even though one of these classes got changed from an elective to a required class, I don't have to take it?
Yes, you've met the requirements for graduation, and if there's something I need to do, if I need to write a letter or whatever, just let me know.
Okay, thanks. I'll let you know if I need that letter.
What is the conversation mainly about? According to the woman, why was the program's curriculum changed? What does the woman imply about the new departmental requirements? Why does the woman mention writing a letter? Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
You should be just fine. I assume you've taken a seminar?
Why does the woman say this?
I assume you've taken a seminar?
Listen to part of a lecture in a conservation biology class.
One consequence of global warming is extinction. There's compelling evidence that global warming will be a significant driver of many plant and animal extinctions in this century. So we're considering various strategies to help some threatened species survive this warming trend, which, as you know, is caused mainly by greenhouse gases produced by the burning of fossil fuels. The most radical strategy being debated among conservation biologists is assisted migration. Assisted migration means picking up members of a species or members of a group of interdependent species and physically moving or translocating them. Translocating threatened species to a cooler place, to higher latitudes or higher elevations, for example. Now, migration's a natural survival strategy. Over the past 2 million years, colder glacial periods have alternated with warmer interglacial periods. And so, in response to these gradual climatic swings, some species have shifted their ranges hundreds of kilometers. So perhaps you're wondering, why not let nature take its course now? Well, we can't. The main problem is today's fragmented habitats. During previous interglacial periods, when glaciers retreated, they left behind open land in their wakes. Today, human development has paved over much of the natural world. Ecosystems are fragmented. Housing developments, highways, and cities have replaced or sliced through forests and prairies. There are few corridors left for species to migrate through without help. So conservationists are trying to save as many species as possible. Now, assisted migration could become a viable part of our rescue strategy, but there are a number of uncertainties and risks. Without more research, we can't predict if assisted migration will work for any given species. A translocated species could die out from lack of food, for example. At the other extreme, we might successfully translocate a species, but within 5 or 10 years, that species could proliferate and become an invasive species. Like a non-native plant that chokes out native plants by hogging the nutrients in the soil. Translocated animals can become invasive too. It happened in Australia. The cane toad was introduced back in 1935 to control an insect pest that was destroying Australia's sugarcane plantations. but the cane toad itself became a pest and has destroyed much of the wildlife on that continent. Also, many species are interdependent, intimately connected to one another, like animals that eat a certain plant, and that plant relies on a certain fungus to help it get nutrients from soil, and on a certain insect for pollination. We'd probably have to translocate entire networks of species, and it's hard to know where to draw the line. And in addition to all that, it's not even clear that assisted migration, or any migration for that matter, will help, at least for some species. Earth was already in one of its warm interglacial periods when we started burning fossil fuels. And in the 21st century, global temperatures are expected to rise 2 to 6 degrees. That rate of heating's far greater than during the last glacial retreat some 12,000 years ago. Whether to use assisted migration? This debate is mostly within the biology community right now, but the ultimate decision makers, in the United States at least, will be the government agencies that manage natural resources. Assisted migration really needs this level of oversight, and soon. Currently, there's no public policy on using assisted migration to help species survive climate change. People aren't even required to seek permits to move plants or invertebrate animals around as long as they're not classified as pests. In one case, a group of conservationists has already taken it upon itself to try on their own to save an endangered tree, the Florida toria tree, through assisted migration. There's only about 1,000 individual Florida torias left, and global warming is expected to significantly reduce or eliminate this tree's habitat. So this conservation group wants to translocate seedlings, Florida toria seedlings, 500 kilometers north, in order to expand the species' range. The group believes that its effort is justified. But I, and many other biologists, will be watching very closely how this maverick group makes out, because, like I said, there could be unintended consequences.
What is the main purpose of the lecture? According to the professor, what problem is assisted migration intended to overcome? What point does the professor make when she discusses the cane toad? What does the professor imply when she mentions translocating networks of species? What does the professor imply about the government's role in regulating assisted migration in the United States? What is the professor's attitude toward the effort to save the Florida Toria?
Listen to part of a lecture in a music history class. So, I just finished reviewing your papers on the influence of nationalism on a composer's music, and initially I was surprised none of you chose to write about Bela Bartok. That is, until I remembered we haven't had a chance to discuss him in class yet. He was a wonderful and groundbreaking composer. Bela Bartok was a Hungarian whose life stretched from the late 19th century to the middle of the 20th century. But he was not a fan of the romantic style of music that was popular in his homeland during his youth.
Wait, Hungary wasn't a country in 1900, was it?
You're right, I should have been clearer. Bartok was born in Austria-Hungary, a nation that broke apart when he was about 40 years old. Actually, the town where he was born is presently part of Romania. The political history of that region is complex. Suffice it to say, Bartok is generally known as a Hungarian composer. So, during Bartok's youth, the music played in the concert halls of Austria-Hungary was dominated by romantic pieces by mostly German composers. We discussed the romantic style last week. These pieces were long and lyrical. They were meant to have a sort of grandeur about them. And in the early 1900s, composers who worked in the Romantic style were the most popular in Austria-Hungary. But Bartok, he was part of a musical community that was trying to change this, and it led him to, well, the first thing it did was lead him to travel. He looked to the countryside for the music of the farmers and the people who lived in small towns. And their music, well, you could say he discovered the music that was popular in those areas.
What do you mean?
Well, all the music we've been talking about the past few weeks, it really was all in the cities. That's where the composers and the orchestras were. Out in remote areas of the countryside, in rural locations, music was more traditional, the same songs that were enjoyed by previous generations. Bartok went out. He traveled through a significant portion of Eastern Europe, actually. He roamed the countryside and listened to the music heard in small towns and at all sorts of celebrations. He attended weddings, dances, and religious ceremonies where he heard a very different sort of music from the romantic stuff being played in the concert halls in the cities. The music he heard is what we would consider folk music.
And then he had those same songs played in the concert halls?
No. At first, he went around to document the folk music. He really wanted to make sure the folk songs were written down before they disappeared. In fact, Bartok didn't start out the trip thinking of himself as a composer. He was an ethnomusicologist. He studied the traditional music of the region. But it turns out that what would later have a notable influence on European music on the whole was the way Bartok used elements he heard in folk songs in his own compositions. He adopted a number of elements from what he heard, like unusual rhythms, and he liked to use the glissando as his hallmark, which he probably got from listening to Croatian folk music. A glissando is, well, I've got a recording of Bartok here. Let's wait until the music is fresh in our minds. Susie, do you have something you want to ask first?
Yeah. Before, you mentioned nationalism and...
Right, yes. When Bartok had his new pieces performed, their folk music roots made them instantly popular. It happened to be a time of strong nationalism in Austria-Hungary, so his compositions came at just the right time. He became very successful there. Particularly, when Bartok's ballet, The Wooden Prince, opened, there was great excitement for music that included musical elements from local folk songs, music that reflected the region's musical traditions. However, As popular as Bartók was in his homeland, he did not get much international recognition during his lifetime.
What is the lecture mainly about? What does the professor imply about romantic music in Austria-Hungary in the early 1900s? Why does the professor mention local celebrations in the countryside? What was Bartók's original goal when he started to travel through Eastern Europe? According to the professor, why was Bartók's music popular in Austria-Hungary? What does the professor mean when he says this?
A glissando is... Well, I've got a recording of Bartók here.
Listen to a conversation between a student and his biology professor.
Well, you know, I'm writing my paper about whales and the paths they travel as they swim through the ocean, their migration patterns.
Yes, I remember.
And, well, I was thinking about it, and I realized I don't understand how they hold their breath underwater. It's a little crazy for me to be writing a paper about migration patterns without actually knowing how they stay underwater for so long.
Did you do any research to find out how they do it?
Yeah, I did. I searched on the internet, and there was a lot of information about whales, their habitats, the way they communicate, you know, their songs. But if there was anything about whales and how they hold their breath, I missed it. I've got a bunch of books. Actually, I've got so much information, it's a little overwhelming.
I'm surprised there was nothing about it in any of those books.
Well, to be honest, I've only skimmed them so far. I'm still working on finding sources.
Okay. I know I encouraged everyone in class to look at a substantial number of sources, but I don't want you to get overwhelmed. Looking at a number of sources gives you a good knowledge base, but students only have a limited amount of time to work on each paper. I don't expect you to read a dozen books on whales for this assignment. Focus on just a few.
Okay, thanks.
You know, since you're already here, I can give you a quick summary of how whales hold their breath underwater. It's just a matter of certain adaptations in their anatomy, specifically in their circulatory system.
So the blood flow is what makes the difference?
Yes, and in a couple of ways. First, blood makes up a larger share of a whale's weight than in other mammals.
So they can store more oxygen because they have more blood?
Yes, but that's only part of it. They also have a greater capacity than land animals to store oxygen in their blood.
So how does having more oxygen in their blood help them stay underwater longer?
It's the way the whale's blood carries oxygen to the rest of its body. Whales carefully conserve their oxygen when underwater in a couple of ways. When a whale dives, its metabolic rate drops, causing its heartbeat to slow down. And the blood flow to its muscles and some of its non-vital organs, like its kidneys, is also cut off. A whale's muscles and non-vital organs are able to function without oxygen for an extended period of time.
I see. Well, now I can concentrate on my topic.
Why does the man go to see the professor? What is the topic of the man's paper? What is the professor's attitude toward the man's question about how whales hold their breath? Why does the professor mention the limited time students have to complete their papers? According to the professor, how does a whale conserve oxygen while underwater?
Listen to part of a lecture in a history class. The professor has been discussing Egyptian hieroglyphs.
Egyptian hieroglyphs are the ancient Egyptian writings found in ancient Egypt on walls, monuments, and on the inside and outside of temples. Hieroglyphic writing ended abruptly about 1600 years ago, and it mystified the most brilliant minds in the study of Egyptian artifacts and archaeology for many, many centuries. Finally, the possibility of deciphering hieroglyphs came about with the discovery in 1799 of the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone is arguably the most famous archaeological artifact ever discovered. It contains the same exact text written in 3 different alphabets: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. But we didn't even know at first that the 3 texts on the Rosetta Stone contained the same information, and 2 of the 3 alphabets are ancient Egyptian scripts that stopped being used, the hieroglyphic and the Demotic. The Demotic script found on the Rosetta Stone, Demotic was not as elaborate as hieroglyphic writing. It was used for more mundane matters, like administrative documents. These ancient Egyptian scripts were replaced by Coptic script. But eventually the Arabic language replaced Coptic, and this cut off the linguistic link between ancient and modern Egypt. Now, the Rosetta Stone was remarkable because, as I said, on it was the same text in 3 different alphabets: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. The stone was essentially the dictionary that scholars needed to interpret the meaning of the hieroglyphs, and it took a uniquely equipped researcher to finally decipher and understand what was written on the stone. Thomas Young, an English scholar, was the first to seriously attempt to decipher the symbols on the Rosetta Stone. He suspected, rightly, that the hieroglyphs were phonetic symbols, that they represented sounds rather than pictures. Until then, all scholars assumed that hieroglyphs were pictographs, that they symbolized objects or concepts. Thomas Young focused his attention on one set of hieroglyphs that he thought would probably spell out a single word, the name of a king or queen. He guessed that the symbols represented the name of the early Egyptian ruler Ptolemy, since Ptolemy was also written in Greek on the stone and was indeed a Greek name. And Young did actually prove that these hieroglyphs represented sounds rather than whole words. Strangely, though, he gave in to the dominant thesis of the day that hieroglyphs were pictographs. He actually dismissed his own findings as an anomaly because the Ptolemaic dynasty was Greek, not Egyptian. In other words, he figured it was an exception to the rule. It was phonetic because it was Greek, not Egyptian. How else could an Egyptian depict a Greek name other than spell it out? And that brings us to the hero of our story, Jean-François Champollion. Champollion built on Young's work, showing that different hieroglyphs spelled the names of kings or queens like Alexander or Cleopatra. But his critics noted that these were still not traditional Egyptian names. He hadn't done any more than Young had been able to do, so he couldn't disprove the dominant theory. Then, in 1822, Champollion was shown a set of hieroglyphs that contained traditional Egyptian names. The first 2 of these symbols were unknown, but Champollion knew that the repeated hieroglyph to the far right symbolized an S sound. He then drew on his linguistic knowledge to arrive at the solution to the problem. You see, unlike any of the other scholars who had tried to crack the code, Champollion happened to be fluent in Coptic. He wondered, and this was the real breakthrough, if Coptic was the language symbolized by the hieroglyphs on the Rosetta Stone. And if so, then perhaps that first disc-shaped symbol might represent the sun. And the Coptic word for sun is Ra. See where this is headed? So if the symbol were Coptic, the first symbol would be Ra, and then an unknown symbol followed by a double S sound. Was this, Champollion wondered, the name Ramses? He was eventually able to confirm that it was. So he had figured it out. Hieroglyphs were mainly phonetic. They represented sounds, not pictures, and the underlying language was Coptic. A lot of work remained, but Champollion had cracked the code.
What is the lecture mainly about? What was Demotic script used for in ancient Egypt? Why was ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic writing difficult for scholars to interpret? What is the professor's opinion about Thomas Young's work with hieroglyphs? According to the professor, what led to the decoding of the Rosetta Stone? How did Young's and Champollion's studies of hieroglyphs differ from earlier studies of hieroglyphic writing?